Jake, as soon as you're online, can you just confirm that you can hear us?
Yeah, can hear you.
Perfect, thank you.
You want to hear?
We'll just shut the door.
Now resume.
Thanks, Melissa.
Now resume here and we'll deal with now Innovation Enterprise Park, special purpose zone. So you would have heard some of the questions we asked earlier on, so maybe you picked one then, but do you want to introduce your team?
Yep, okay, thank you, Chair. My name is Wayne Smith. I'm Director and Principal Planner of Zenith Planning Consultants. With me, I have Andy Knock, who's the CEO of Farm Holdings, and Adrian Tonks, who's a Manager of Engineering for the park as well. Just in terms of, may I suggest the order of the presentation in the sense that we'll go topic by topic, and that way we can discuss and then have the questions related to that issue rather than just me say something then the next team member and so on. And I'll draw on my learned colleagues here when the time is right. So in terms of that, I'll just get Mr. Knock now to introduce the park and the team, just to give a background of what the park's about. Some of you will be familiar, but for the purposes of this, I think it's important to get the context.
We were just talking about doing the site visit there sometime. Obviously, we wouldn't want to go live with you three because you're involved in the hearing, but if we decided to do a site visit, is there somebody that you could nominate, take us and show us?
Yes.
Who's not? Okay, so we'll sort out a day that hopefully fits all three of us, then we'll give it to you and you're happy with that.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Main seat or stand at the
Oh, you sit down. Yeah.
Okay. So, perhaps if I give some context to it, firstly, if I can introduce myself, I've been CE at Farm Holdings now for coming up to 12 years, so quite a significant period of time. My previous background is in international development and investment and a lot of regional economic regeneration projects throughout Europe. And so Narthorpe Park, I suppose, culminates a lot of that experience. To give you a little bit of context of the site originally, the site was originally owned by Top Energy, it was divested when they looked to expand the geothermal park. It was offered to council as a site which could potentially offer commercial advantages in terms of being developed for an industrial park as they described it at the time, based on the proximity to the geothermal field and cheaper electricity pricing. You still had all the other fundamental issues as to why nothing was established prior to that, and I'll go into that later on. It was offered to the council, and the council basically did a bit of a referendum with the community as to whether they should purchase the site, take charge of their own destiny, and put it into FNHL. And as a result of that referendum, the council purchased the site, because I think it was pretty much a unanimous support, and it was put with FNHL to see if we could actually do anything with the location. Fortunately, PGF came along at the time, and we were able to carry out feasibility work and look to secure a project which would allow basically a movement away prior to COVID from low-paid seasonal tourism jobs, which was what basically Northern had on offer, to look at creating an environment which offered the opportunity to capitalise on the raw materials Northern is very good at exporting, adding any value to. To give you an idea on that, at the time we started the park, and it's not changed, Northern exports 1,000 tonne of raw materials and makes 1.5 jobs in terms of added value. Hawke's Bay creates 8.5 to 9 jobs for every 1,000 tonne of raw material, and Auckland 32. So it shows you how far behind our region is in terms of added value to our economy. We're basically just a very good exporter of raw material, not making any added value along the way, whether that's manufacturing, processing, etc. So that was the principle behind the park being established. And on the basis of that, we started to do some work in terms of understanding what that opportunity was. The other big issues we identified, and we spoke to 250 businesses around New Zealand, as well as going to a number of other established parks to understand what we needed to offer. The other critical issue was employment, and whether we could actually maintain and attract employment. And so that was another identified issue we had to address going forward. So the park fundamentals were primary sector, education and training opportunity, and then support to actually create the value-added opportunity. So stage one of the park was effectively founded on that, in terms of we secured PGF funding from central government to put the infrastructure in, which was a cost of 20 million. But it was only on the basis that we secured A, a large employer, B, the education and training opportunities to support those employers, and B, the R&D or the economic side to actually drive the value out of the primary sector. So on the basis of FNHL securing 2 education skills-based training providers, being Tupakanga and Region, which allowed the skilling of effectively 180 students potentially per annum into full-time transferable trades training, and securing a joint venture with an Upper Asset Holding Company to develop the strawberry growing enterprise, which was to create full-time jobs throughout the year, and then the Innovation Centre itself to house both the Economic Agency, Crown Research Institutes, and offer laboratory for developing primary sector products into added value. So based on that, that was what stage one was established upon as a starting foundation to then allow us to then go back to the market once established and look for the larger manufacturing and processing opportunities which will really start to generate those full-time equivalent jobs. The big issue for the park, and it will always be there, it doesn't change, everybody in this room knows it, is proximity of the market. The biggest market is Auckland, it's the biggest customer market, so everything we export goes to Auckland and beyond. And we all know the issues in terms of infrastructure and transport costs. They're significant for any business. So if you've got a business, where do you want to be? You want to be in Auckland or South. Northern does not have the advantages, and it's very difficult, even though the park has been tried to become or create a unique selling point by being effectively a closed loop park. And what I mean by closed loop park, I'm talking about it's looking to stand on its credentials as being one of the first Green Star rated parks in New Zealand. It's been designed by mapping all the environmental waterways, every single tree, and developing, when you go there, you'll see very much a landscape setting where the buildings are effectively sitting within the landscape rather than a typical Auckland where you just 100% flood it full of tarmac and every single site 100% coverage. So it's looking to identify with Green Star rating, having that symbiosis in terms of waste management and mitigation, looking at climate change, looking at environmental issues, and standing us apart from any other park in New Zealand. But a business is not going to go to a site just based on its credentials. Credentials are great to have, and it's nice to say on your website or the products you're exporting or manufacturing that I am in a Green Star environment, I'm doing my bit for climate change, I'm working with lots of other businesses in terms of symbiosis, in terms of waste mitigation and recycling products, or using seconds to create further products. That's all well and good, but it doesn't help your bottom line. The business's bottom line is based on its operating overhead costs. And if you've got significant overhead costs because you transport to market, you've got to offer something that's equivalent effectively. Now, we can do that to some extent in terms of we provide a very good land cost, a very good project management fees. We keep cost overheads down to a minimum, so that helps to support that case. Then, when you start to address that commercial bit, the next thing is then employees looking to come up here, or you're looking to employ local people. Any business in Auckland has a significant draw card in terms of what it provides in terms of services for its employees. You go to any business park there, you've got on-site services, you've got on-site gyms, you've got on-site restaurants we're talking about here, you've got on-site retail services. You've got a full array of things to keep your staff there and provide everything they need in terms of their day-to-day working environment. So you provide an array of services which encourage and attract people to there, particularly when you're in a more remote location. Those become even more critical. We're looking to effectively in the park rely on our credentials, but also offer the same competitive advantage of any other site in terms of the array of services it can provide and the array of services it can attract. So we're looking for as much flexibility as we can, because we know in Northland we're up against some incredibly well-developed parks with incredibly well-developed infrastructure. Yeah, we've got one road in, one road out. We don't have any services on site to offer employees or staff. We don't have any accommodation on site to offer employees or staff. We don't have the array of businesses that are connecting together, and a lot of businesses rely on the connectivity between businesses to generate further product development or just business connectivity, facilitates new markets, new opportunities, whatever that might be. And so really what we're looking for is to really just put ourselves on that equal footing with our competitive environments, because we're one of a lot of regions looking for that one business who wants to locate out of Auckland or expand out of Auckland or be in proximity to its products, and we need to be able to meet the needs of that business. And in Auckland, I'm sorry, you've got to be as flexible as possible. If you're not going to be flexible, then forget it. We're already struggling now. We've got the stage one up and running, but getting businesses, there's no manufacturing or processing businesses on that path yet. And so we're looking at that next step is how do we get them over? We've got to provide that flexibility. We've got to be able to address their needs as much as we possibly can, and we've got to remove as many obstacles as possible. And so really that's what we're here to do today, is to try and break that flexibility so that we can offer a far greater appeal, or at least put us on equal footing with any other business park in New Zealand. I suppose that's Any question?
I don't have any questions for Andy.
No, just Andy, not for, no. There would be some questions, but maybe we should hear all three of you, and then we'll go through our questions, and I've got quite a few, but they might come up.
No, that's fine. Okay, so if we now delve into the specific issues of, what's important is that a lot of these facilities that we're looking to broaden the scope of are ancillary to the primary use, and we haven't lost that, in fact. So in terms of childcare and other aspects that we'll be discussing, these are very much ancillary uses to the primary purpose of the park. And so we're not looking to recreate an urban centre of any form. It's simply an employment and education facility and the related services related to those activities. So in terms of the first issue, and what I'll do is I'll go through the order of the 42A report in a general sense, and where we, as Final Holdings, agree with the recommendations, we won't really necessarily go into that in any detail, but we're quite happy to answer any questions. Like some of the matters raised this morning are matters that we agree and concur with the 42A report, we're quite happy with. So,
a very quick question.
Yep.
Like I said, if you have a restriction on the childcare centres in say 1 or whatever, have you got any comment on that to start with?
Well, I'll go through the childcare thing first,
Okay.
and then we can ask that question specifically.
Right, okay.
It's more the generic ones like the controlled activity for buildings and things like that, which Final Holdings are comfortable with that approach. Originally, we were dabbling with areas and sizes, and it just got all too complicated with different size platforms and percentages and things like that. So to simply have a controlled activity for the size, we're more than comfortable with that approach. And it gives council a degree of control over matters like conditions like landscaping and things like that if need be. And as a good applicant, we would we'd be prepared to offer those things anyway. So it's all part and parcel. So if I want to now delve into the main issue, so the first one, which was in the policy as well as objective and well as policy, there was a specific exclusion for childcare facilities as part of that recommendation in the 42A report. As Andy has alluded to in his introduction, this is very much a no barriers to participation approach. So we want to make sure that if someone wants to undertake training or they want to undertake employment, that they have somewhere on the site that's local and close, which is available to those people participating in the activity. And when we look broader at so Andy will in a short time talk about some of the interaction he's had with some of the providers on site and some of the issues that they raise and problems they have. And one of them is childcare, is availability of childcare. And in terms of availability within Kaiko, which is a very valid point raised in the 42A report, that at the moment there's currently no capacity within Kaiko for childcare facilities. So that is it may be just at this period of time, but we're more than comfortable to have limitations placed on the number, as you alluded to earlier, and even potentially numbers. But I'll let Andy talk to what he's getting direct feedback from the operators within the site. And so there's the education operator and the employer operator. Andy, if you want
So just the childcare?
Just the childcare, yeah.
So the childcare, like I said, the key thing I think you need to understand is we're not looking to compete with anything in Kaikoui. The issue is here, we need to be able to adapt as the park grows and provide services as the park goes and gains critical mass. Because these are key questions we get from most of basically the individuals we talk to. Childcare centres you'll see in pretty much every single large innovation park, industrial park, logistics park, you'll see them on every corner. Part and parcel of life. Now, we know for a fact, even the Berry company, if you talk about 30 jobs, one of their best pickers and the pickers they like are basically women, because they're for some reason much better at picking fruit. Obviously, guys have got big hands and tend to squash it, I don't know. But, it's single women. It could be, and it's quite often you've got single women who may have a child, and there's the reason for that. You've got to provide, in that situation, is there opportunity to provide childcare. If we go to 10 hectares, which is obviously the next stage, that's 100 individuals. If you go to 16 hectares, that's 160 people. At the same time, we've got Tipukenga, who are now moving to do a nursing and a number of other associated health care training at the park. Now, that is obviously all going to be majority, I'm guessing, women as well. And putting nursing to one side, there's obviously a lot of other training carried out at Tipukenga, and it allows for upskilling, getting qualifications and getting jobs. So to me, the things come hand in hand. So it's how much of a constraint you want to be on upskilling our community to get full-time work and to have a better lifestyle for them and their families. To me, it comes hand in hand. It also comes hand in hand when we go to larger manufacturers or people moving to the area. They're the same. They're moving up either with families to the area, and we're speaking to 2 businesses right now. And the first thing they're inquiring about are what other facilities, because they've got staff who are relocating, and that's the provision they have in Auckland. So if we can't offer it, then it is an inhibitor. There's no question it's an inhibitor. But what I'm saying is right now it isn't, because we don't have the critical mass. We're only just starting to create that. If this goes where we want this innovation park to go, which is generating employment and removing the unemployment we have in Paihia in the north, then you've got to address it, because otherwise it makes, to be honest, my life a real problem in trying to solve council and community problem.
So in saying that, the modification of the Paihia report, as a result of our submission, which broadened the scope of P2 and O1, we would request that the exclusion of childcare be deleted and as recommended in our brief of evidence and or statement of evidence, and also within our submission. So I think that's one of the issues we have. The second one, which we've briefly touched on as well, is accommodation. Now, within the park itself, obviously we have students and trainees, and there is provision within the policies at the moment, P3, to enable students and trainees to be accommodated on a temporary basis within the park. We, as the park operator, seek to expand that to include staff involved in the training process, as well as also those who may need to be on site for various reasons. Now, this is not to result in a residential enclave or anything like that. And we have yet to, we haven't really thought about the density or anything like that which could apply, but it's simply intended to be for trainees, trainees and students are currently allowed to be there anyway, in accordance with the policy. We would seek to expand it to include staff, and then for those that want to be unoccupied type arrangements, as was discussed earlier. In terms of, and so one of the main things, as Andy has stated, was that employers, one of the first things that you see on any social media site, for example, is I'm starting a new job, where can I work? And that is probably the most common post for someone who's moving to an area, where can I live? And the housing shortage is quite intense, and it's worse over summer. We know many people who, some of who work with my boys, and they're basically living on couches until such time as they find something. There's not enough couches almost to accommodate the temporary workforce that is needed for the tourism industry and for the park. As part of its whole attraction, it needs to be able to provide this flexibility on a controlled basis. So, I mean, we haven't talked about where this rule might be, and I can't remember off the top of my head where a residential intensity is proposed. But I mean, an activity like a discretionary status or RDA would be where I'd see this activity fitting in terms of the process. So it wouldn't be a controlled or permitted allowance. It would be covered to make sure that the necessary restrictions as required are imposed, so it doesn't create a residential street and compete with other urban areas. And I know that Andy and Adrian at one point were looking at trying to build residential, and I said, no, we don't want to go down that path, it's just too difficult. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about the accommodation. You've already touched on it.
Yeah, I've got a question on it.
Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of what you've just raised there, just a question about housing typologies. You've ruled out sort of the standard residential unit that would fall under that definition, because you don't want to compete with, Paihia as a town centre and making your own new town centre on the edge of the town. And so, what's your thoughts around the typologies that you're considering? You've talked about student accommodation. you talked about accommodation for staff. Can you elaborate more on
So
that?
again, this is where, you know, an environment we're working in is a fluid environment and we're trying to adapt it. So I had a conversation on Friday with Tor from Tipperary, who talked to me about what they saw for half an hour. As we know, Tipperary started off on a fairly rocky road, because went through a restructure. The actual centre was actually reasonably quiet, although when I went there yesterday, it was really buzzing, which was good to see. But what he's saying now is that that centre has the potential to be not only a domestic one in terms of far north one, but also international. Because he has identified the Northern for its primary sector in terms of its offer for horticulture, and also for nursing, and he's looking to make it both for our district, community, and as an international destination as well, which talks to, again, the council talking about having a higher learning education and developing a real centre of excellence. The issue for Tor is on both counts, he said, whether it's for students across the district, if they're coming from Paihia, 2.5 hours back, 2.5 hours there. He said, I can't run courses domestically even without having a student environment when those courses are running. Internationally, I've got to have it. So right now, I'm going to offer that course, but it's going to be in Whangarei. When you can provide it to me, the course will come to Northern. So it's in my submission because he wants it in Northern, because that's where the course should be run and that's what he identifies with. And it will be offered in Northern. He says we have got far more potential if we've got the ability to provide for students, but also for staff accommodation. Because the other issue we talked about, staff accommodation, which from several people, is there isn't any. Everybody does Airbnb in summer, you can get a part-time rent. In winter, you can't find a house anywhere. You know, a year ago you could find, and there's a few more about now, but there's just not the accommodation available. And so in those situations, he wants staff, next to, because they're obviously supervising students as well, so it's a dual role. But then also we've got other businesses which are looking to come up. Again, they've got, you know, it's the CRIs coming up from Roker or Southland, they've got to come up, they need somewhere to stay. Whether it's businesses, you know, we're looking to attract businesses which generally have an international market and are developing, you know, in that sector of primary sector of manufacturing processing. So you've got people coming from abroad, and you've got staff resident on site potentially 24/7. So we've got to, again, have that ability to cater for that staff, because, again, if the staff can't get accommodation, price is too high, unavailability, then we've got exactly the same issue with childcare.
I have a supplementary question based on that response. I'm not sure how staff accommodation will not fall within the definition of residential intensity.
Probably,
And
yeah.
what you're proposing to address that, because I can understand student accommodation and the design parameters for the housing typology for that, but how do you intend to look at the staff?
Yeah, I think because what happened, if I can go back in time, when we drafted the 32 report for council way back in the day, we had a residential intensity rule on this very matter, and I think it was aligned up with the rural production intensity. I think was and then in the drafting, somewhere along the way between us lodging the 32 and associated reports, and then when it finally got into the plan, it got tweaked and modified, and there was a few sections that got fleshed out, and that particular rule got taken out, or that message. So that's why we've asked for it to be put back in. The accommodation for students and trainees has been picked up in the policies, but there's actually no related rule to it either. In that sense, I think because we originally had it in the draft that we sent in, but it got modified and changed by whoever, then that's the gap that we're trying to fill again, and perhaps rather than say it hasn't been, we haven't really thought about it. We did back in the day, but we haven't pursued it further, other than to say we need it back in. And my suggestion would be perhaps at the rural production rate or something perhaps slightly more intensive than that. I mean, that it depends what the intensity ends up being, but that could be sort of not that great given the size of the property is 240 hectares or something. So roughly that's the sort of area, and we haven't got any numbers or anything to tell you what the demand might be, but we certainly would appreciate a residential rule in there perhaps, as well as the modifications of policy and the objective to reflect that.
So just talking to the typology, I mean, because that was something I didn't answer, but obviously from George's perspective, and again, we don't do anything unless we can obviously commercially generate funds to obviously invest in that. So we're not going to suddenly build a load of houses and hope we can rent them. Unless we can rent them underneath whatever is approved, then we're only going to do it based on a case-by-case and demand basis. So, for example, if Tor said, right, I've got 30 students coming and I'm going to rent, I need a building for the next 10 years, then it might be a block, for example, a student block of 30 with some staff, two or three staff units next to it. The next person comes along and they said, right, I need a couple of staff units and whatever it is, or talks to expand. So it's going to be, potentially one or two blocks, which are student accommodation related with potentially shared service provision within that. Again, we don't know because we haven't gone into that detail at this stage, but that's what we're imagining. And then obviously separate blocks in terms of relating to staff so that they're not actually within the student accommodation area. But again, it's one of those things where we, again, just need the flexibility because we can't respond to it unless we've got that flexibility.
I suppose the biggest question is how much flexibility, because
I know.
that's the trouble, isn't it?
It is, but it's just knowing that if we had that demand, I mean, it's not going to be significant, but I mean, at the end of the day, there's, two blocks of 30 and you've got, a dozen, we're not saying we want a housing estate by any means. We're really just saying, and at the end of the day, I don't think anybody would object if we suddenly bring in a manufacturing plant that's got 50 jobs and I need 2 houses for the staff members. Not an issue. And if I replicate that 5 times, I don't see why there should be any issue at all, because without those senior staff or specialist engineers or whatever it might be that allows that to happen, I'll do it every day of the week, because those 50 jobs are worth far more than those 2 houses. How those detract from policy, I don't know. Those jobs are worth far more to me.
I'm just trying to think what it would look like. Because, say for example, pick on the Woodland Motel and Kerry on the main street on the left. You've probably been there for a year. They have what I would call seasonal workers cabin where they share facilities, and then at the back we've got individual bedrooms and bits and pieces there. Is that the type of thing that you're thinking about, or are you?
I mean, mixed use is something which is becoming more and more popular with urban areas, and not that this is an urban area, but the park itself is offering a commercial element to it, and so I think there should be some scope within that to enable it to happen. And that's simply all that we're asking is for the enabling for not only the trainers, not the trainees, because the trainees are already allowed there as well as the students, but the people giving the courses, as well as those who may decide to be an owner occupier of one of the sites and decide to live there, because you get industrial parks in like Aruru Falls there. They've got the businesses down on the ground floor and the premises upstairs. That's the sort of possibility. It may be standalone, it may be part of the same building, but the reality is that where it is at the moment with the policy and the objective is that it's not allowing us to do that for those types of individuals. And from an effects basis, I can't see the difference between a person's a person. It's not like it's, and the purpose that you're there is the key important thing.
I think a question to that relating to location of the park in Paihia, just around down the road, fully reticulated urban, not urban under the NPS and Midday, but, you know, urban as one of our main sectors of the farm, and then now we have the Napa Innovation Park, which was a commercial industrial park, as you said, to build on primary. I think my question is the integration, you know, how is it not being integrated within the one, you know, town, the one settlement? And I think that's a key issue in terms of having the residential activity there. How is that creating a link to the town and creating, you know, good urban form within the town and within that locality? Because the park, in terms of reticulation, you know, allowing for the densities, that's not within the current horizons that I'm aware of.
The park, in terms of the linkages, that was a very key component of the resource consents that have been granted for the park. And it came up very much with, in terms of the Green Star component. So the Green Star endorsement takes into account all of those factors, and obviously the park doesn't score so well on some of those aspects, but it's also that Green Star rating is more of an urban thing, and yet the park is almost achieving those thresholds, and we've been assessed on different things, on connectivity, on providing those sort of things, and so and some of the uses is also not really what you'd want necessarily in an urban context, and with a rural flavour to it as well, with the strawberry operation and those sort of things. Those are on the fringe of town anyway. So it may be that in years to come that the gap is narrowed and the town comes to the park. Yeah, that's all a possibility. Yeah.
And I think as well you've raised the residential density proposal in terms of housing density. Under the current plan, it's one dwelling per 2 hectares discretionary. Under the new plan, I'm not sure what the density is for residential intensity, or under the new plan for the rural zone.
I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry.
There was, and I wasn't sure as well about the activity status you're proposing, because is it for residential as well? Because there's 240 hectares, as you can imagine, you know, as residential, that's going to be quite a number of houses.
Yeah, the thing is though, they can only be in the envelopes that are consented. So there's 30 something, 33 or 38. Yeah. Anyway, they'll only be in the envelopes, and some of those operators won't be doing those. So from that perspective, it would only ever be in the envelopes anyway. And some of them are already fully developed, and so it would be within buildings or not in those sites that are fully developed already.
You know, and if you're tipping over, you don't want your staff right next to the building. You know, so in most cases, you know, you want that to be able to get away from work, the students get away from the student environment. That's a key thing. So you've got to create a separate area where, you know, that can collate together. You know, and you don't want to replicate services, you know, on every site having its own services for residential purposes. You want to have one site purely for economics as well. So to us, it's identifying, you know, an area of the park which we would look to then say that is an area which is, you know, suitable for that activity, and then allows that to have proximity to your either work or your education environment, but you've got an environment you can escape and live as a normal individual would in a reasonable setting, and get efficient services into that as well.
Thank you. I just have my questions are in relation to residential and childcare facilities. And my concerns over maintaining the viability of primary production activities whilst managing health and safety risks, exposure to chemicals or, the air quality created in that rural environment, and just, the potential hail report, and just, making sure that your plan, which is hard to tell in this where everything is, but has some buffer zones in there. So how would you ensure a safe, healthy and supportive environment for residential and childcare and further education facilities so that it doesn't compromise the viability of the, one of the biggest things that the park was created for, primary production.
In terms of the separation of activities, so you have three distinctive areas within the park. You have the horticultural area, which is where the berry operation is, and that's typically where the less, they do whatever they do in the glass house, in the plastic houses, and that's in a confined environment, so they would be subject to normal regional council requirements in that sense. The middle area, which is the main innovation hub area, it doesn't have any of the, there's no planned horticultural or operations which could, from a farming perspective, interfere in that. They will have potentially discharges from normal manufacturing activities, should that apply, but that will also be subject to regional consents as needed. And the only area that hasn't really been explored in great detail is the eastern end, and that in itself has a number of other issues around developing in those. It's the hardest part to develop in terms of activities, and the plan is fluid on that in terms of what may or may not happen there.
That's where the existing wetland is?
Yeah, there's wetlands, there's all sorts of bush areas as well, so that's why it's been avoided to date in terms of anything in those areas. And saying that though, the platforms that have been identified are the most suitable building sites, and they've gone through preliminary landscape and visual assessments, and also from the engineering perspective, they're suitable for the types of uses that may occur in those sites for the park. In terms of hail side of things, though, that's been limited to where the earthworks have happened, and that's in terms of the horticultural area and the innovation hub itself. So it's just again those two fingers there, and there's pretty much nothing of substance in the on the eastern site, the eastern finger, which is undeveloped at this point in time.
Just to give you a head up, so site 19, if you look at the master plan, is the site we identified as possibly a logical site for any residential staff stroke student accommodation, because again, it's up high, it's surrounded by trees, it's got the dam next to it, and it's got, it's quite a serene environment, which takes you away from the park, but you're in very close proximity for attending courses or work, as the case may be.
Just thinking out loud at this stage, I mean, obviously at this stage you want flexibility, but you've got no idea really, to a certain extent, what you want. And of course, it's difficult for the planner to comment on that. Is it worth you going away and having to think what you would like and where you'd like to put it, and then provide that to the planner so then he can report back to us and we can consider it? I mean,
as you talk about a residential area.
Yeah, I'm talking about the residential. That's what residential.
I mean, but this is where I referred to site 19. So if you said site 19 was permitted there for residential stroke student, it limits it to that in the first case and allows us at least the flexibility to adapt to change. So that was why I suggested, site 19, because that's a logical location, and then as it unfolds, but,
Yeah, but again, it's the numbers, I mean,
oh, yeah,
yeah, that's, and so then,
And typologies.
number and typologies, yeah.
I mean, I don't know, you're virtually dealing with the same as what we're dealing with. You've got a comment that was like this. We don't really know what it's going to look like, and neither do we. So is it worth doing that? And that's the staff opinion. I don't mind.
Yeah, I think we're talking, there's few issues kind of going on here, and I think with willing to accommodate sort of accommodation for visiting staff or on-site workers, but we're sort of getting into the realms of residential development broadly. I think we need to sort of limit that to some extent, sure, like it's not intended to apply for residential development and design this is completely ancillary to the private purpose of the zone. I think, potentially limiting out some of those development areas is one way of doing it, providing some sort of constraint on where that might occur in the actual numbers. And also, I think we need to be thinking about some clear conditions to make sure that it's ancillary to trading activities or employment on site.
So if you, I mean, that's what well, James, do you want to comment?
Nothing good.
Yeah, I mean, so, because at the moment, I feel as though that we want this, what you want and you don't quite know, and of course the planner can't comment on it to a certain extent, because they didn't know what you want either, so I'm saying, try and get your heads together in the next month or something, and, and we'll delay our site visit until you maybe decide and get feedback from Jerome, and we'll have a look at it. That's all we can do, because we can't look at anything, can we?
Yeah.
So do you have a suggested residential intensity, or is it something that you would rather us come up with it? But I mean, I want it to be constructive, so I mean, if you can guide it and give us a guide.
Why don't you, because you can deal with your own, and,
Okay, that's fine.
because you may come up with A, and he says, oh, I don't like A, I want B, and so just have a chat.
Yeah,
We can get some indicative of the 1 per 40 hectare residential intensity, which is the same as the rural production fund. So I guess that could provide a starting point.
Is that the permitted or the controlled?
That was as a permitted activity. Well, so if you control, so standard associated with new buildings, so if you control activity rule, and you limited to that intensity within the zone. And that was the first draft provided on the special purpose zone. I think mirrored off the rural production zone.
Yeah.
I guess as I said, it's probably a starting point. If you come back to us.
Okay.
Keep in mind, we haven't done a rural zone yet as well. I was just going to highlight that, and you've been in part of submission related to that, as staff will probably aware. I also just want to highlight the other point of reverse sensitivity, the childcare aspect hasn't been addressed, and how, or anyone that's consented to childcare would know that noise is always the issue that needs to be addressed from reverse sensitivity. And then also the traffic. And I know that there's been information in here regarding traffic outside of the park and on the adjoining roads, but that would actually change the traffic flows within the park as well, particularly at peak times. So just highlighting that those would need to be addressed as well in terms of managing those effects, and how you would address those with including the childcare centre, and also potential limits on that. Because if it's considering the activities on site, are parents from outside of the park coming to have their children there, or?
Yeah, we've had those discussions. Yeah.
Mm.
And in terms of reverse sensitivities, as it's primarily commercial, industrial type site, I don't see that as being major, because normally the issues relate to residential. And so from that perspective, unless the facility was somewhere near a nominated area, or if we're going down that path, or I would imagine that wouldn't be an issue. And also, if there were residential units within the sites, that normally have to be acoustically designed as they would normally in an industrial or commercial setting. So I don't necessarily see that as issues.
And I think, you've already highlighted potentially the residential you're highlighting for site 19. I'm not sure if you had a potential location for the childcare facility. And that has been highlighted there. If there was to be one, would it be limited to one? And the number of children, essentially having limitations on the scale.
Yeah, I mean, limited to one, you wouldn't have more than one, certainly, no. I mean, yeah, we're not after more than one, so, yeah.
And then the site that it would go
Yeah,
to.
but we did identify a site which was on the entrance, coming in, because obviously anything like that is, for parents, it's dropping it off and making it convenient. So in other words, you can drop off and then go straight to whatever building you need to go.
Mhm.
So logically, it would be at the entrance rather than, at the back of the park, right in.
Coming back to the question on the traffic influence on the road, the innovation, the second one, the road has been designed to meet or exceed the local road requirements for farming. So, yeah, that question. Speaking okay.
Okay. It's taken a bit longer than I expected. So there are more issues. So the scope of the education offering is the next point of contention, and we briefly mentioned it before. And the park, this has come directly from the operators within the park. They're well aware of what the park's intent is, but they've actually asked for the widening of the scope to enable those that aren't offered in other facilities in Kaikoui and Kirikiri and other places like that. So that is something which is related to also related to P3, and it's under clause G. So that's where it's a rather blunt reference there to in the recommendation, but we would ask that it be related to other areas as well. So this clear. Any questions on it? Okay, so the next one is the design guidelines for the park. Now, under P7, this submission was rejected originally by the planner in the 42A report. Now, that was mainly because we didn't have the guideline complete at the time. So you'll see in your packs that that's the updated guideline, and if Adrian can highlight the changes. Now, the changes don't affect the envelopes, they don't affect anything really, they're just they're improving the numbering and a couple other little minor things to make sure that's accurate.
Yes, so on reviewing the design guide, there was some anomalies or errors. So none of the body of the text has changed. Since the initial application under the special purpose zone, some of the land has been disposed of. So the first change was to the boundary, which was remove the frontage on State Road 12 at the Wallace Road end, which ties in with the NZTA requirement, not to get another access area. Anyway. So that boundary has been adjusted to show that. On the next page, the plans are unchanged. However, when they were originally printed, they were missing some of the colour hatching. So you had a key but no corresponding colours on the plan. So that was correction of that. Again, the boundary changes has been reflected on all those plans. On the development zones, the colour hatching on several of the zones was missing. So the outline was there, but you couldn't clearly see where it was. So that colour hatching was added back in. And the horticulture precinct originally had no numbering. We felt it was helpful to add numbering there so that any policies or rules could relate to a numbered area of the plan. And then the final change is the swamp alley planting was indicated at the top of the hill. There was an error in the hatching, so that was removed. There was never any intention of the planting being a woodland species, which is over this as well. And I think that was that was the swamp area parking planting, and it was just a hatching off. So it's minor corrections really.
I'll just have a question for engineering in terms of future proofing, in the horizons for Paihia, in the next 20 to 30 years. So in terms of future proofing for infill reticulation at a later time when all of the infrastructure in the farm is going to be contested, what provisions are allowed for in terms of that, just to understand the infrastructure provision, because this is, I'm not sure if I know, but development that our council has in our district, and that is of this scale and doesn't have reticulation.
Where to start?
So what, in terms of, in terms of the consent side of things, we have regional consents for wastewater, stormwater, discharge, water take, and earthworks and a smattering of other minor ones. And they cover the whole park development, the entire future plan. So the wastewater is something like, it has enough capacity in there to cope with all three areas. We've only got, most of it's going to be building, and the requirements are relatively modest in terms of discharge levels. So in that sense, every site can be reticulated to the on-site system. And I understand it might be modular, so as and when demand increases, we'll then uptake the regional consents that we have in place for that. And the same with water. There was a water source. Originally, there was a lot of discussion about the dam and when that would be available for the park in terms of the strawberry operation. And originally, we not only had on-site dams, but we also had drawings from bores. And so those consents are all in place as well, but we've had, because the dam has been constructed now and the arrangements are in place, then that's sort of our backup if the need arises in the future.
So, thanks, Mike. The stormwater, not necessarily an infrastructure extension point of view, but from a design perspective, it went a lot further than was a requirement in the district plan and engineering standards of its time, and I'm confident that it will stand well in the future should those rules and policies change. So looked at drought conditions through to extreme events, both in terms of mitigating the effect and also their safe conveyance within the park. Water went through a number of iterations because with Muswell Dam coming or not, we had potable water constraints from Kaikoui. So as it stands currently, the innovation of the enterprise finger is supplied potable water from the Kaikoui firefighting, so we're up to effectively FW6, which is the highest industrial water supply standard within the innovation finger. We can deliver 200 litres per second firefighting flow, so probably well in advance of what most industrial parks would be able to do, certainly brownfield elsewhere. Potable to those main human contact areas with the manufacturing production, where the people are is from town supply. The peripheral sites, which are more rural, be either their own individual schemes, so that would be either roof water or board, but they need to go through the consenting process with board intake. For wet industry, we've got the Muswell Dam. So from Muswell Dam, which is in the to north-east, there's a large pipeline that runs pretty much through the park and out to the state highway. Well, that part's been constructed, but the pipe through the park's there. And then wastewater, we've kept that on site, so it's a distributed scheme. So individual sites have a primary sector, so they're responsible for what. Actually, that's not entirely correct. The Fund Holdings oversees the management of those individual management contracts for the primary sector tanks. Those primary tanks will do about 80% of the treatment. Then is a low pressure effluent lines that run to a central secondary treatment plant that takes it up to secondary treatment quality, and then it goes up in drip lines under a forest area. So we've got about a hectare set aside for that. The wastewater is currently being constructed for 15 cubic metres per day, so it's about 30 households worth, if you want to think in terms of, you know, what people might do using town. And then it's got expansion for another 10 cube and then another 10 cube. So that would take us up to 35 cubic metres of wastewater discharge a day into that trip. So that's constructed and is modularly expandable both at the treatment plant and at the treatments in the field. So we're not, I think your question was how does this tie into Kaiko in the future? We've really set it up to be, to not burden Kaiko. And I guess the other thing is really around the human contact, potable water, and it makes sense in the more isolated sites for those to be on their own scheme, but the drinking water standards are reasonably advanced, so it makes more sense. We've got more intensive usage to connect into Kaikoura, so that's really what
I was just asking because currently the Kaikoura wastewater consent has been done its time and it's out for solutions at the moment, or soon to be out for solutions, including significant upgrades. So, yeah. Just to get their context around, particularly Surrey, yes. But yeah, I don't know the horizons of the existing system and future zoning that would even allow for expansion out. So I think that's further than the horizons currently proposed within the master plan.
There is currently reticulation past it's for the small, perhaps Springs Village is on there as well.
I think we're in the area of benefit.
Yeah, we are. Too big. Yeah.
Choosing the strategies.
Yeah.
Well, it was just going to be too much for
Yeah, it got too difficult, so we deal with it on site. We have the land to do it, so we went through the exercise of securing the regional consents for it. So,
and that 35 cubic metres per day would match the ultimate development projections, but you know, we're not really constrained on those areas. There are other areas that we can expand to if we even really got been a problem to have, but we would be able to address it.
It'd be nice to be fully utilised and that management fully developed.
What's next?
so engagement with tangata whenua. So there was a particular object, P7 in the plan. Now there's been quite an ongoing relationship with Ngāti since the original inception of the idea for the plan. So there's been a number of hui held at the marae, and even as recently as last week. So they assisted in preparing and they provided a cultural impact assessment for the site, as well as a key party to input into the design guidelines for the park as well. And the roles that Ngāti have had in terms of the process, they include everything from on-site monitoring to plant sourcing, helping with those aspects of it, providing input into the management of effects and things like that. Now, it's the The submissions, we won't delve into the submissions that we received because they were addressed adequately within the 42A report. However, the inclusion of the reference to the TW6 is somewhat concerning for the park because we've got this relationship with Ngāti and we want to tailor the provisions to their involvement and addressing them as mana whenua for the site. So we would prefer that we have the policy directed to the memorandum and to the CIA that's already been prepared, rather than a more generic reference as suggested within the 42A report. In terms of the update on the MOU, Andy, could you just give a...
Yeah, I mean, the governance teams have been catch up regularly every few months, and the latest one was again supposed to reflect some of this conversation that it's been quite a fluid environment, and it's adapting all the time. So I think the key thing that came out of the latest meeting, which was actually on Friday, was that all the time that the governance and workshop groups are basically well engaged, listening to each other, communicating well. That is far more important than having something in writing. So we've got plenty of documents, but the key thing is that we're operating in a fluid environment, and that narrative keeps changing anyway. So that came out of that is that we're continuing on the same path we have been. I mean, we won the Economic Development New Zealand Most Inclusive Award for our relationship with Ngāti Rangi. That continues. And so, yes, there might be some other documents coming out over time, but right now we continue working in the same way we have done over several years in terms of they're involved in a number of aspects on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, as we would do with our key stakeholders.
Can one of you tell me what's the difference between Ngāti Rangi Kai Ngāwha, Ngāti Rangi Kai Ngāwha Hapu? Because it looks like it's been discussing the two organisations.
There is different, within Ngāti Rangi, there's a whole bunch of different entities, if you want to call it that, and they represent largely either themselves or their hapu. And so I would suggest that this has come from hapu within the, because those submissions, in reading them, they were from individuals representing their families, I think, and wanting to be specifically involved in the process. And we had suggested that it's more Ngāti Rangi as an entity that's, and certainly that's the message we're getting from the powers that be within Ngāti Rangi, that it's the Ngāti Rangi entity that we're dealing with and not the individuals.
Yeah, but I don't think you've got a copy of the officer's report there, have you?
Not all of those,
I
sorry.
mean, I'm just referring to paragraph 113, and from our point of view, it refers to two different organisations or entities. Both request amendments to the rules to ensure consultation on compliance, and with reference in regard to the Ngāti Rangi Hapu Cultural Impact Assessment Report.
Yes.
Now, is that a different thing to the is that something that's included with the MOU, or is the CIA and the MOU connected in any way?
So the authors of the CIA are actually the individuals that are mentioned in those documents. It's very confusing. So two individuals, well, one in particular wrote the CIA on behalf of Ngāti Rangi and went through the normal process of getting endorsement from Ngāti Rangi. And as I said before, those individuals are putting themselves under those descriptors. And so it's part of Ngāti Rangi, but not the it's a, well, I don't want to call it faction, but it's part of that hapu.
So from our point of view, we're keen to rely on the original cultural impact assessment, which was developed with the hapu, and our continued relationship with the hapu that we've had for many years, because that's been incredibly engaging. verified.
So an MOU is not an RMA,
Yeah.
as you're aware. So in terms of determining mineral status, it's not up to us to determine mineral status, which is why, in terms of some penal chapter, that's why I was supposed to go through that process. How do you propose that we address those issues that I've just raised, without referring to an MOU and a district plan, which is not, until used through the RMA, and have consistency through the methodologies about how the plan works as a whole?
I think so originally there was a policy in there dealing with this aspect that was subsequently modified within the 42A recommendation to include the reference to TW6. We have simply suggested that that's bringing in other entities potentially into the matter, and Ngāti Rangi who do have mana whenua, there's no dispute on that. They're the party that have been involved in the preparation of the CIA. They're the party that have been involved in the design guidelines, and they are actively engaged in the monitoring of aspects of the conditions of resource consents already on site. So, for all intents and purposes, it is solely just Ngāti Rangi and the CIA that we're working with, and so that degree of specificness is relevant, as we don't want to broaden the scope too much given that relationship. And yeah, so as I said originally, the changes prompted this response from the change in the 42 report has prompted this response from Whānau Province.
And the CIA probably encapsulates most of that relationship as well.
So the recommendation from the officers to add PN, and it refers any historical, spiritual or cultural association held by Tanga to Whenua, and are you saying that Tanga to Whenua owns it up too much?
No, it was reference to the TW6, the chapter, or the policy. And so that's where we've got no issue with the policy in principle. It's just simply that reference to TW6 is more wider scope than what we would see that as.
We just put a full stop after
Yeah.
Whenua.
Yeah, I mean, that was in the thing is, it was in the original draft, the original proposed plan didn't have the reference to TW6. We would rather it be out, but if it's not out, then we suggest that it needs to tie into Ngāti Rangi, if it is to be specific.
The existing CIA.
And the CIA and as I said, they've been involved and they're still involved today, tomorrow, next month.
Okay.
But, just in reference to that, so the resource consent process has been, now we're moving on, and we've talked about this morning as well. Now we're moving on to the next phase, which is where you're proposing a new zone. So essentially, fresh start in terms of what we're looking at. And so, yeah, and my fellow commissioners also we raised, because that was raised about other projects and other special zones that had original resource consent and changes to that as we move into having its own special zone. And so I just wanted to highlight that was raised about other matters and other special zones, and I'm not sure about that response. I'll have to consider that further and hear from the planners, but yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. I'm all over the place with my questions because you've answered as you've gone for me. Thank you. Firstly, really awesome to have this because one of my first questions was in regard to the special zone and whether you feel that aside from us working with you on the housing, residential, whatever that's called. Do you see that the special zone addresses the flexibility that you're seeking?
Certainly, well, we were fortunate enough to prepare the draft, and while there was some changes to some of the aspects in the drafting and in the final version, the intent has not changed, and the overall goals and objectives of the park. Now, what has changed slightly through the process is that our some of the businesses involved have asked for various things to, as we've alluded to previously, and so that some of that has been driven by occupied expectations or requirements. But yeah, generally we're more than comfortable with the scope. We're not intending. We would have suggested other changes if that was part of the mix.
In your vision statement, it says people are driven by consumer demand, and so you're seeking a special zone. What we end up with ideally will meet what you're aspiring in your vision statement.
I believe so, because we can't really use any of the other zones within the proposed plan. We went through that exercise of doing it, and other than being fully commercial, which is not what we wanted to do, the scope was difficult, particularly with the range of rural related activities and adding value to products, and that is not encapsulated by any of the other zones. So really there was no other option but to do a special zone.
In another special zone today, there was reference to a landscape plan from 1998. Would you see the inclusion of reference to the MOU or the CLAA in the special zone as important as, say, the landscape plan, included in another zone?
The design guideline definitely needs to be referenced, and it's a document within which a lot of those parameters that you talk about are mentioned.
Sorry, you probably weren't in the room when this landscape plan from different zone I'm referring to. I'm just trying to...
Yeah, so from a landscape perspective, if I may, in the original resource consent applications for the park, the very first ones, there was a landscape assessment completed at the time, and that formed part of the, that was also slightly modified to, and was attached to the 32 report in the original proposition for the park and the plan change. So if you refer to the 32 draft 32 report and all the technical documents that were included, part of that was the landscape side of things, and some of it was related to works that have been completed, such as what says today. But there's also other areas which have been largely untouched, and obviously there's issues around how you deal with the measures there, and that's partly why we're actually quite comfortable with the controlled activity status for all buildings within the platforms, because that enables a degree of control for everyone. We know what we're allowed to do, there's no uncertainty, and the council has the measures in place to have conditions as appropriate for the activities proposed.
Thanks, Wayne. What I'm getting at is the CIA prepared by representatives from Ngāti Rangi and the MOU that you referred to in your report in here. You have, originally, in here you've asked for them to be included as a reference in the special zone, rather than the Tanaka Whenua.
Yes.
Plan. Would you see the inclusion of those as you know, as a reference, as important as landscape guidelines or the, you know,
Yeah, absolutely, because, I mean, it's been a partnership from the beginning, and while I've not been involved in the meetings, so I've been to some of them, particularly the preliminary ones when the objectives were set out, and then since then it's been really Andy and his team that have been involved in the governance team that they've set up in both entities. And from that perspective, it's an ongoing relationship. And so from our perspective, rather than broadly say just TW6, we would much rather it tailored to the hapu that we're dealing with on a regular basis and tailor it to the zone itself. And it's unique in that sense. It's not like a generic rural production zone, for example. It's tailored to that. And as a special zone, I think you can make allowances for a much more targeted approach in terms of the nuts and bolts.
Yeah. My further question was still on the hapu, and I'm not sure which one of you would best be able to answer this, but could you tell me how you think they would feel if they were not captured in this special zone by name versus appearing in the Tangata Whenua chapter?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that, sorry.
Yes, good questions, and I think the fact you're referring to the CIA, and the CIA has been done by Ngāti Rangi implies it's Ngāti Rangi, because I'm pretty sure, I said, like, they are keen to be acknowledged, correctly, as you're probably depicting, because there is always the other hapu who would like to be in that position. So I think that's possibly what you're alluding to, potentially another hapu saying we are Tangata Whenua, and therefore if it's specifically Ngāti Rangi, there's no question mark, it's identified within the documentation that they are a hapu that we engage with, rather than having it as just.
Thank you.
And we'll hear back from the officers what they've got later on.
Cool.
Right?
Okay, I'll try to be quick with the next bits. Okay. Quicker, yes. You like asking lots of questions, so that's good. Okay, so the next one is retail. Now, this is again, and it's similar to, so the officer earlier this morning suggested there was coming together somewhat of the idea in terms of the size and scale of retail. Now, originally there was quite a significant restriction placed in terms of the proposed plan, and then obviously our response to that was to deal with it as a percentage, and I see there's shortfalls in using a percentage given the size of some of the buildings. So as a result of that, we had a bit of a session, and we've come up with in our statement of evidence the suggestions there in terms of maximums of 150 square metres for buildings up to 600 and 200 for buildings over 600. And that's essentially to accommodate the possibility of things like showrooms or where someone might display their product or retail it, and it's not intended to be because some of the buildings, as was pointed out, are quite big. So they're multi-thousand square metre buildings, some of them, and having a small retail component, should that be warranted, because not every building is going to need it, but there are occasional people that say, oh, we want to display our wares and what we produce, and we want to have the option of someone going in there and buying it as well. So that's where that, I mean, it speaks for itself. The suggestion is there. We feel that the suggested size is in the 42A report is still not enough. And So the 100, I think it was 100 square metres was suggested.
100 square metres.
Yeah.
So I've just got a question about that, because it's related to the gross business area and what you've requested 150 square metres for buildings up to 600 and a maximum of 200 square metres over 600. I'm just thinking about the context of the character of the special sign. So it's industrial and with primary production, then it's residential, so you're adding the residential component, and now there's a retail aspect. I'm just thinking in the context of its original intent is morphing a little bit towards, as you said, highlighting having more flexibility to encourage people to come to the special zone. But 150 square metres, I can understand that in the context of design. When you're looking at the housing typologies where you have mixed use, where you have a retail activity or on the bottom level and allowing for that. But this proposal here doesn't really, it's got reference to design guidelines, but not necessarily how that will look in terms of urban form within the context of the park. Do you have any comment on that? Because
I suppose
the same question about you having retail there, and then what about the main street of Kaikoura that's dying?
So I'll give you context to this because this is specifically relates to two inquiries I've actually got and negotiating on now. So as you know, if you go into the centre, we've got that wonderful timber on the ceiling and on the walls, which is a local entity, Riverwood, who effectively pull up the native timber out of the Paihia River, and it's a raw material product, and he's looking to grow that business. So he's actually looking at putting a production facility on the park, and we've got a co-invest alongside him, so it's a little confidential, but he's happy for me to share, is because he wants to go, instead of exporting effectively just planks of wood when he can, he's looking to do tables, chairs, furniture, so it's high-end added value, which is exactly what this park's about. Now, to do that, he does not have the money to set up a business, set up a showroom, it all has to be contained in one building, which a lot of businesses do. So he will look to have effectively sawmill, laminating plant. It could be a building of around 1,000 square metres. Now, within the front of that, there will be glass, a bit like we've got in the Tipperary region, so no different to any look of those buildings. It's not going to look any different, but that will be effectively a showroom for his product. So you can see what you can get and what he can make for you. Because if he doesn't show it there, he's got to have a showroom somewhere else. He hasn't got to have a showroom somewhere else just for somebody to go somewhere else to buy it. So effectively, again, it's economies of scale and it's allowing businesses to grow within their capabilities, because even moving up from a level where he's operating off a farmyard under an open barn, going into your next step up is a huge cost in terms of that overhead. And so it just helps those businesses become sustainable. So this is going to create jobs, but it's going to fit in. It will look no different to any other building on the park. But the point is, it's a hand in hand, because that's the way he's going to be able to develop those products, sell them to the market, and have the ability for people to see what he can offer. So that's one example. Another one, for example, was when we originally looked at honey. Remember, we had the proposal for a consolidated honey facility in light of the impact on the market with the new MPI markers. And that was a consolidated honey facility where we were going to try and then, create it as to some extent also tourism related. Having glass viewing so you can see it being blended, extracted, etc., then come in and buy the product. So they're much smaller facility and a much smaller volume. So you've got one extreme, which might be a 75 square metres, because it's just small jars of honey. I've got the other extreme, which is furniture, which is large products on show. You can't put those in a small area. So even to me, 200 square metres is going to be fairly constrained, but at least it gives me something to work with when I'm talking to those types of entities who are just looking to effectively coexist the manufacturing and the showroom outfit, because they can't sustain anything beyond that.
And just in terms of your query around the built form control, as the buildings need resource consent as a controlled activity, there'll be scope within that, and the design guidelines are fairly specific about what things should look like. So from that perspective, I think any concerns you have around those relationships will be covered by both the design guidelines and backed up by the fact that a consent will be required for the building.
I just got an ancillary question based on that response, because point 106 there, the evidence states it's crossed out the word primary production retail. And so what that does is opens up to other activities that aren't ancillary to the industrial activity on the site. Then I don't see that as offered as being a condition to limit the scope of the retail to the industrial primary manufacturing activities.
It's inferred, but I mean, we'd be more than happy if it was limited to that. There's no issue there. There's no issue with retail being limited to that's made on the site. I mean, that's what it's for.
Yeah.
There's no, it's not like a convenience store, we're going there and get a drink or something.
No, I think that would address some of the
Yeah,
concerns about
the reality is that the suggested size for certain businesses is simply not big enough. And that's the reason why we've put those two measures there. Yeah, it was larger, but
Sorry, I've got a question on that though. Doesn't primary production, retail limit the scope that could come out of Te Kukinga, depending on what courses they have? Might not be production, might be some other form of enterprise that's not production, could be a service.
this only relates to retail though, so if you're doing retail activity within the site, then they wouldn't be doing. This is simply where you've got a retail activity happening.
But isn't something like massage services considered retail? Like if somebody wanted to set up a beauty therapy place?
Well, whether you'd have one of those in the park is I don't know if it's an ancillary use to the, maybe if you've got a difficult job and you need.
Education facilities.
Yeah.
Courses being provided at Te Kukinga. What I'm saying is, don't you feel that primary production limits?
Yeah, I'm picking up points, like I said, if they go into nursing and then you've got, like I said, therapeutic and other, you might end up with some offering something.
Part of our submission did request that primary production be taken out, so we had just simply reached
Yeah,
out.
and I think that's what.
But that's,
So have you,
yeah, so that was part of our submission,
so
but
if you can widen it beyond primary but not retail, then thanks.
So have a consideration of that.
Yeah, so perhaps we could just.
I'm very wary of the time it's taken to get this far.
And you go a bit quicker now.
Yeah. Okay, there was,
Per fine, where you DFA of the office education facilities not exceed 300 squares, and you don't agree with that? We wondered where the three.
yeah, we were just querying where the 300 size came from. At the moment, the two establishments on the site are much bigger than that. Probably over 1,000. Te Kukinga and region are much bigger than that, and we were just wondering where that measure came in. So from that perspective, I mean, that's just a discussion.
Staff.
Yeah, they can answer that query. In terms of retail, cafe and takeaway, there was a size limitation again placed on that. The allowance, because it's closed floor area, that includes everything, including prep area, storage, the actual counter, and maybe a table or chair. And so we consider it to be 150 would be our preference. It's not, it is a discretionary, activity, restricted discretionary at that threshold anyway, but we would suggest that that would be a more suitable sizing. And the final matter is around traffic movements, and this relates to the recommendation was rejected in the 42A report. And I think what I'll do is I'll set the scene, then Adrian can come in. So basically, when we got the consents in place for the park, there's two key entrance points, and each of them have limitations on the volume of traffic. They've been designed for certain capacities, and what we're seeking to do is to, until we reach those points, we don't need to worry about traffic. We simply acknowledge what the activity is, and then otherwise we're coming out, the way the rule is written, we would need to provide a traffic report each and every time that we lodge an application. So until we hit those thresholds, nothing happens, and then when we do, the suggested wording that we've got there covers that. So, Adrian, do you want to?
I mean, that essentially captures it. Yeah, it's just the work's been done, so why are we doing every activity in terms of the external fence?
So it's not circumventing what was put in on the resource concerns regarding Wallace Road and NZT and everything like that. We're just putting that in and saying, well, why, we shouldn't have to do it until the year of the.
Yeah, and it's very
There's no point when you're down here and you're down there.
Exactly.
You know what the answer's going to be.
Yeah. They've all been designed for certain limitations, and until we hit those limitations, we don't believe that as I said, the way the rule was written, the way the standard is written, it says, you know, basically every time we lodge an application, you have to provide this and that, and that's unnecessary, and it's up to there'll be scope anyway with any consent that's lodged to review traffic matters anyway when they're required.
Do you understand that since your resource consent, there may have been significant numbers of and interest in addressing Wallace Road?
So Wallace Road has been a point of contention from the beginning. There is a limitation in terms of the consent requirements for the operation, particularly of the berry farm, and so there's a directional flow of traffic requirement within the site, and I'm not aware of whether there's any issues, but whether operationally they're doing it not in accordance with the rules, I don't know. Personally, I don't know.
I think there's a number of issues in the early stages, because you obviously had not only our construction work, but then more importantly, you had quite significant construction work for the dam, which caused quite a lot of angst in terms of dust, in terms of the road degradation, etc. So that was obviously a major concern for a lot of residents over that period, and most of it actually related to probably the dam activity. So we were doing a lot of dust suppression and a lot of other things along the way. In terms of the movement KBLP, they're still at 3 hectares. They've not gone to the full 10 hectares yet. When they go to 10 hectares, that will trigger, their movement in a circular form. Right now, they're still at that capacity, which is below, and we haven't got many vehicles going because they're still only producing 3 hectares. So it's not anywhere near the heavy vehicle movements that we had anticipated on Wallace Road, which is quite a smaller number anyway.
Could I just talk to that? So the integrated traffic assessment was interested in the number of traffic movements, doesn't really differentiate between heavy and car movements. Where the concept of heavy vehicles came in was we really need them on shores transport route, but also they're easiest to control. We can have Bomax EU, we can control because of a different size of vehicle and limit them. So there was a particular part of that standard that related to underlying lots and DPs, and part of the submission evidence was really talking to saying, well, it's about traffic movements and traffic counts, and the context to heavy and light was more around there's less heavy and they're easier to segregate and control in an implementable way. So that's the background to them.
And just, in point 133, a maximum of 30 peak hour vehicle movements via Wallace Road. That's the threshold, that's your maximum. And does that mean that there's 30 movements an hour? It could be.
Yeah, up to you. It's peak hours. Yeah.
So currently, if you go down there, I think it's about 10 vehicles. So it just shows you if you went down there today, it's more likely about 10, maximum 15 vehicles on a day. So, you know, it's nowhere near, obviously go to that probably 10 hectares, but at current, the 3 hectares, it's probably about 50% of what's covered.
Yeah, sorry, Bill.
That's right.
But
Keep going.
just for Wallace Road, concerns that were raised in one main submission. It's not really the number of vehicle movements anyway, is it? It's the fact that it's unsealed and the houses there are so close to the
Yeah.
road.
Must be particularly bad in the summer, I think.
Yeah.
Even if you get one vehicle going down.
Yeah,
Because the house on the right is very close.
How do you decide whether you're going to put water on the road?
I mean, that was just done because of the number of heavy vehicles that the dam was using. So of course they had to walk it down. And of course a heavy vehicle, a lot more wheels, a lot more dust coming up.
Yeah.
Whereas a normal vehicle doesn't generate as much, obviously no, or anywhere near as much. So yeah, that was it.
Okay, thank you.
And they also use tackifiers as well as water. So.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's. I have nothing more to say.
That'd be good to say.
Anything else?
Oh, no.
I do have a copy of what Andy basically
Okay.
discussed, so I got him to paraphrase rather than read it.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that's 10 copies in there for you.
Oh, thank you. One question, like, with the, you've got your vision, that's very helpful. Was it always envisaged that there would be a retail component at the Napa Innovation Park?
So in terms of showroom activity, then yes, because I mean, that's a logical thing. A lot of large manufacturers, even in Auckland, will have a showroom retail component, and that's another extension to their business, particularly where they're exporting abroad and then they're selling locally to the domestic market. So that was envisaged. In terms of general retail, no, you need to get to a quite significant critical mass to say, right, this park is now fully occupied with 500 businesses, we need a small retail store, etc. But we know we're so far away from that, we know that will raise issues because of Kaikoui. Nobody's going to invest in a retail store in the foreseeable future. We'll address that in due course, if we get to that point.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your time.
presentation. Actually, we'll be in touch about site visit.
Yep.
But we'll wait until you and Jerome have some contact regarding residential estate, okay?
Yeah, no
Yeah,
problem.
we'll pull that together. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right, Mr. McGrath. Ready? Thank you for waiting. We're going to have a quick toilet stop. Sure. I might go over
Mute while we're break.
We're not dealing with the hospital special zones, and we've got Melissa McGrath.
Oh, sorry, I'll give you a clicker. Right, we are unmute. Good.
Just before Mr. McGrath starts, I just noticed something, Jerome, and I did have a question on paragraph 43. It refers to the EV Happy Management Plan, which will be finalised in June 2024. And my question is the hearings panel will be required to take this into consideration in their recommendation to council. My question is, and you don't have to respond now, is how are we going to do that?
I think Tony knows the answer.
Anyway, well, yeah. How, I mean, yeah, anyway. Page, paragraph 43. You tell me when you're ready.
I think we've got to try to get everyone on the screen at the same time.
Oh.
I think we're okay.
That's fine.
Felicity's there twice.
You got the good looking one.
Can I move on?
Come on.
All right, afternoon, commissioners. I will start by just confirming that I am well versed in Paihia. I grew up here, I went to high school in Paihia, had my first baby at Awani Hospital, worked at Paihia District for a number of years. I worked with the operative plan both for council and lodged some applications under it. I have read the code of conduct and confirmed that I follow that with my evidence for you today. Unfortunately, due to timing, Monique Fowler is no longer able to provide corporate evidence on behalf of the special audit.
If she's got anything right, she can send that in and we can get it and we'll read it.
Will do. If there's anything particular about the redevelopment of the sites, I can ask those questions of them as well. Obviously, my evidence is focused on planning matters rather than corporate. I have a presentation that I will move through. This will help us get through the evidence fairly quickly. I'm happy to take questions as we go. Or not. Is there a direction? Was it on? Turn my left. Should. You just press the buttons. Okay. Yep. So this is just a summary of the matters that will be covered. Monique was going to cover for you the role of Health New Zealand and Te Whatu Ora, so I just highlight that it is a dual role. So they have a function of providing public health facilities throughout the Paihia district, but they also have a role of promoting public health generally. So they have a dual purpose in their submissions to the proposed plan. And I note that it was a matter that was identified in the opening presentation to you earlier this morning. Submissions that were original submissions on behalf of Te Whatu Ora were lodged under the name Ngātai Ora, and at the time of the proposed plan, property functions of Te Whatu Ora were quite separate from the wider public health functions. Further submissions were lodged under Te Whatu Ora's name, and that is the name of the submissions on property moving forward. So they are one and the same entity now. Sorry, moving on. That's just a bit slow. So I've summarised those for you. So the key components were the promotion and protection of public health in the Te Whatu Ora original submission, and that submission did not necessarily focus on the specific property details, which the Ngātai Ora original submission did. So I just highlight for you the importance of regionally significant infrastructure. This was a matter that I raised in the first hearing as part of the strategic direction submissions that were lodged on behalf of Te Whatu Ora. And again, I raised that for your attention. I note the right of reply from the reporting plan of the strategic direction has not recognised or acknowledged regionally significant infrastructure. But I do acknowledge that the reporting plan for this topic and for the special purpose zone has recognised the importance. So the key component or the justification for why public hospitals are regionally significant falls out of the regional policy statement, and I've detailed that for you in my written evidence. So with respect to the proposal to include a special purpose hospital zone, I support the introduction of that specific zone. However, I do note that Te Whatu Ora have sought amendments to the zone spatially and acknowledge that that will be heard in a future hearing. However, it is important to keep that in mind when you're considering the submissions and evidence before you. I note that I support several of the recommendations in the 42A report, including the definition of hospital, the increase in the hospital height, and the decrease in setback from boundaries. I note earlier the presentation from the 42A officer gave you the spatial locations proposed for the hospital zone. I have for you identified the locations that are owned by Public Health and Te Whatu Ora. Now, these differ from the spatial distribution of the zone proposed by Council. Commissioner for you raised the concern of parking with respect to Kaitaia Hospital, and Kaitaia Hospital is by far the most constrained of the sites to be rezoned, just due to its proximity to the surrounding activities such as Kaitaia College. There is a redevelopment master plan that has been proposed by Te Whatu Ora. At the moment, it does include a proposal to increase on-site parking, particularly for staff. And I note that there are a number of sites surrounding this that currently have residential buildings on them that could be incorporated into the redevelopment of the site if necessary, and that could provide more room and more space for development. I also note that the proposed plan, sorry, I'm doing some homework in the break, includes within the transport chapter proposed transport rule 1, which is parking, and it has permitted activity standards requiring on-site parking, and it specifies limits for hospitals. So 1 park for every 3 hospital beds plus 5 per operating theatre plus 1 per remaining 25 metres squared of GFA and 1 for every 15 employees on site. So Te Whatu Ora have not lodged submissions opposing those parking standards. I note that they're entirely open for a future hearing, but there is a mechanism in the plan to ensure that at time of redevelopment parking is considered, and if Te Whatu Ora were unable to comply with that permitted standard, then the necessary consents would be required. And the potential effects of that busy road and parking shortage would have to be considered at that time. Bay of Islands Hospital is quite a isolated site. It's surrounded by a large lot of indigenous vegetation. It's up on a knoll with very little neighbouring properties, has a through road running through it. Again, this has a concept master plan that Te Whatu Ora have in place, and they are actively undertaking that at the moment. We are currently working through divestment of the bottom portion, which is a process that's in play at this time. And Rawene Hospital, again, quite isolated at the southern portion of Rawene. It is on a knoll, again, they've got hospitals up high. The site does, or the land owned by Te Whatu Ora includes the property on the other side of Rawene Road or Hanel Street. And again, the main entrance and main activity is to the west of that. So it's quite isolated, surrounded by roads. So just moving on to the key points of contention. I have included for you a copy of, this is an extract from the Midday Hospital redevelopment plan. So this at the moment is a work in progress. This illustrates the impact of height in relation to boundary for hospital development. So it's important to note that height in relation to boundary, building height setbacks are a package deal. So they work together in creating a building envelope. And at any time, if one of those controls are too restrictive, it can have a significant impact on development within a site. So under this scenario, the corner of the building is caught by the height in relation to boundary, and it effectively means that that yellow area of the proposed hospital ward is lost. And so what that means for Far North is loss of beds. In this scenario, it would be Paihia, but if it was in the Far North, loss of wards, loss of beds, and loss of health services to Far North District. And I can understand the logic that the reporting planner has applied to potential effects on adjoining properties. But as I've showed you, the sites are relatively isolated, with Paihia being the only one that is in close proximity to residential activities. And in my opinion, the benefits that you gain from being able to develop the sites outweigh the potential effects on those limited adjoining properties. And this is about future-proofing for Far North's public health services. That is a key, essential life-saving service for this district. With respect to the proposal around activities within the site, I have recommended in my evidence slight amendment to objective 1, which I note that the Te Whatu Ora original submission asked for a new objective, and upon reflection and review of the 42A report, I do not support that recommendation. Instead, I have recommended a slight alteration to objective 1, which is on page 18 of my evidence for you, which is 18, which includes the concept of integration within the site and providing for or enabling it to operate effectively and cost effectively, which are the two key concepts that were coming through in the original new objective that Te Whatu Ora saw in the original submission. Along with that, I have supported the reporting officer's recommendations with respect to policy 1. And these two recommendations to you tie into this concept of hospital-related activities. And our commissioners, you picked up on this morning, that the proposal put to you from Te Whatu Ora is to include the definition consistent with the Paihia District Plan. And that includes a listed number of ancillary activities to the hospital. The reporting planner has not agreed with those listed before you in the presentation. And within my evidence at paragraph 10.5, I have justified provided reasoning as to why I disagree with the reporting planner. With respect to commercial services, it is my opinion that this would result in an exclusion of a number of services that are essential to hospitals, such as general practitioner services, doctors, which would fall into the definition of commercial services. These operate within hospital sites now, and it is important that they are located in proximity to. It would also exclude private service specialist and general medical facilities, which again would be excluded due to the loss of commercial services. I disagree with the reporting planner's conclusions and recommendations around that. The reporting planner considered that the definition of hospital would capture those activities, and I disagree, as the definition of hospital proposed is limited to regionally significant infrastructure, which is limited to public hospitals. So it's a circular sort of little definition there that would cause problems. So for those reasons, I consider that commercial services should be provided for whilst they are ancillary to hospital activities. I also note that there's disagreement with respect to visitor accommodation. Visitor accommodation is a key component and is quite often complementary to hospital activities. I have given you an example within my evidence clause point C on page 19. The likes of Ronald McDonald House is very often within a hospital site, and they provide essential visitor accommodation for families, particularly with children being provided with healthcare services. So these are activities that are essential to be co-located with hospital activities moving forward. Again, emergency services, there's a disagreement between us with respect to co-location of emergency services. And it seems logical to me, and it is strange in my opinion, that these activities aren't enabled to be co-located, particularly with respect to ambulances, and you have helipads within each of these hospital locations, which it would be useful to have co-location too. Moving on to the definition or the consideration of care centres within activities ancillary to hospital-related activities. It is very common for hospital activities to include hospice care. I know Darwin Hospital has a whole ward for hospice care. So again, to me, it seems illogical that this would not be included as part of an ancillary activity. I note that the submission also sought to delete proposed Rule 5, and the reporting planner has disagreed and sought to retain that proposed rule and exclude from the definitions care centres. And signage and lighting, I consider to be ancillary and necessary to support the health and safety and operation of the hospital. And for those reasons, I support the relief proposed by Te Whatu Ora and as detailed in my evidence.
Melissa, is it possible to give an updated what are they called, the plans? I note the one on page 8. I can see the date there, it's 2021. I can ask, that's the information that I was provided when I requested copies of any master plans. So I can, just assuming that this, and the services listed on page 8, up to date as well, but will these go into the district plan? Like, yes.
No, that's not what I intended, and that's not what I had sought. It was just to give you a background of what activities occur there now.
If it's based on 2021, it's wrong, because they've finished a big redevelopment. Yeah. I'm not sure.
If you can get updated plans in and they can send them to us.
And we were thinking about doing a site visit.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with the hospital, we probably just go there.
If you wanted to particularly walk around the sites, I would have to clear that from a health and safety perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
So we
We'll
can coordinate that.
Yes. Questions?
Well, I just had a supplementary question about the car parking. So I'm just thinking how that will be addressed. It is helpful with the plans spatially for the Paihia site and, you know, identifying the pieces of land that are owned by by the hospital, the Ministry of Whātua Order. In terms of the expansion, the two aspects for intensification, I can see the shadowing effects on the neighbours in terms of what you've raised about the height relation to boundary rule, the sunlight rule, and also the car parking aspects about how that will affect the surrounding streets, the surrounding areas, particularly for Paihia, given it's the most restrained site. You said that that will be addressed in the future hearings. But in terms of the current special zone, why is it that you haven't sought to address that as part of the special zone?
Address what components? So Te Whātua Order have sought to change the spatial location of that zone.
Mm-hmm.
So the extents before you are not final and open for future consideration. And Te Whātua Order chose not to oppose the parking standards that have been introduced in the plan. So they are satisfied that that is an appropriate level of parking and will trigger to require resource consent. So they're satisfied that that matter in the plan is appropriate. So again, transport is an entirely separate topic that I can't stray into.
Yeah, and I think I'm just raising that now because it will have impacts in the future hearings. And in terms of the special zone, about allowing the intensification, it has a lead-on effect to those other aspects about the traffic. But that will be addressed at that later hearing. But in terms of addressing that, there may be implications on the special zone as a result of that.
If we go,
rezoning. Correct.
if we go close to the boundary, is that what you mean, that more land can be developed?
Yes, so the provisions sought under this plan change, the two are interconnected.
Yeah.
We're being asked to do a special zone and rules and parameters around that, when we don't know the spatial extent because that's in a late hearing. I know that we're not making a final decision, but I'm just tabling with the panel here that there will be a consideration to look at the holistic outcomes. The two need to be looked at concurrently.
I agree with you, and that's the problem with not hearing the entire zone.
So from, you said Te Whātua Order didn't put a submission in about the parking,
Not about parking, no.
and that parking related to hospitals?
Yes, it is.
So is
Yes,
it, I mean, staff can maybe tell us if there's no submissions against the parking provisions related to hospital. That means it's through.
I also have a further question to start about that, not just about the parking, because if we do move to be a tier 3 under the NPSUD, the parking, one of the provisions is that the parking limitations don't apply, so I'm not, so there will be lead-on effects from other sections as we go through the plan. And that again will have implications on all of the surrounding areas, particularly for Paihia because of its limited space. Is staff able to respond about that and the timing of the hearings in the special zone and how all of those different components in front?
It's a very, very complicated tapestry, of course. We can respond initially through our written around submissions on hospital parking. There are matters that we're still working through around tier 3 in terms of council's response and approach. In particular around a spatial extent, and similarly where the NPSUD actually applies in practice. So those matters might also answer the question as well. So we're perhaps not quite there, but we're looking to avoid
in detail. My understanding in terms of, my understanding in terms of tier 3 status, that's only currently being assessed in relation to the Kirikiri Waipapa area. I don't believe at this point in time that anyone's raised a question over the other neighbouring towns, potentially having potential to push us into tier 3 status. So the way this framework works is, if, for example, Kittyfield Waikato was ultimately the tier 3 council, then the parking dispensation would only relate to that area. It wouldn't be a district-wide outcome.
I'm on the panel for the previous hearing and we yet had the discussion, but I'm not sure that interpretation is set by staff, or if the panel decides, you know, that direction about, in terms of if that would apply to the district as a whole, or if we actually pick and choose which areas are
The
related.
the scope of EPSUD is quite specific. That's about who benefits. So that's the extent to which the provisions apply.
So certainly at the moment, my understanding is only in relation to Kittyfield Waikato have there been submissions in relation to tier 3 matter. We are certainly as a council looking at it across the board. I'm just working on some information that I've been given in-house that would appear that further work has been done in relation to Kittyfield Waikato. I haven't got a formal response yet from the growth planning and placemaking team, and we'll share that as soon as it's appropriate. But at this stage, it looks like it would be more likely that it would relate to Kittyfield Waikato. The advice that at this stage that we've been given is that if, for example, it was only Kittyfield Waikato that was meeting those thresholds specified in the NPS, then the parking outcome would be constrained to that area. So it wouldn't automatically apply to Edinburgh district, for example. So it wouldn't be in rural areas or other towns within the sector. But that is the conclusion reached by the relevant parties.
The panel's having a discussion about the feedback from staff, and then we'll find out feedback.
It's going to be something you'd want to get right and then,
Yes.
and then provide it right into the staff, and to the panels, the different panels, because,
It's more than one panel. That is correct. So it would be shared with all panel members.
Yeah.
And as rightly pointed out by Commissioner Floyd, obviously the panel has a role to play in terms of conclusions that they reach as well.
all things being equal, though, if there's no submissions to the parking regimes for hospital, that means it's A. That'd be correct, isn't it? There's no submissions against it.
We'll report back on.
Yeah, I'm just saying, and my view is if we go to the, I'm not saying we're going to the 3 metre boundary, but if we go to 3 metres boundary, that means there's going to be more development, so there'll be more staff, so there'll be more car parks need to be provided. That's the way I work.
Or a resource consent.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And so that's quite correctly, Commissioner, is a balancing act for the Budget Board to consider when looking at redevelopment of these sites.
Okay. So in your evidence, I think you said the height in relation to the boundary are the same that you picked New Plymouth District Council.
I just gave you some examples.
Yeah, so that's why you're suggesting that. And apart from Kai Tire, where there's a bit of residential development, the other ones won't be affected too. So, right.
And I pulled out Thames Coromandel for you again. So it's probably got some smaller centres. It actually does have smaller centres, and it may be a little bit more closely aligned to the likes of Kaitaia, Rawane, Bay of Islands versus Midday Hospital, which I note is the regional base.
So the definition of hospital, you're both in agreement with that. It's regarding the activities. Now, can you tell me Whangarei definitions? They've been all the way through and they've been now opposite?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
They are opposite.
Okay.
Can't find it, but make it up. Somewhere in here, I think it might be the start, section 42A, but you also alluded to it in your presentation. There was a submission from, I can't remember who, asking that that portion that you're considering divesting is made not rural production, but mixed use. And I can't find where you supported that.
And so that, I haven't included that in this evidence because that's for a rezoning hearing and I'm unable to present that to you today. I just flag for you that that's an issue and we're well aware that that southern portion of Bay of Islands Hospital is of interest to everyone.
Okay, cool. Eric? Well, no.
No? Sure. Is there any opportunity? Any don't questions, one you don't have.
Okay, all right, we're done, question. And so I'm not a planner,
No?
but I used to live across the road from the hospital. So the height setback rule and the land soil quality, the soil quality there, any whether we change the rule or not to what you're recommending, any building, any extra buildings would have to go through a resource consent process and take into consideration the risk of subsidence because that hospital is on a big cliff.
So that would be a building act matter. The reporting officer may be able to elaborate more as to where things are going with the land and stability components of the proposed plan. So there are elements of geotech assessments that may be necessary depending on stability mapping or soils. But certainly as part of a building consent and assessment of the structural nature of buildings and or influence retaining and the like of sites that would be addressed under the Building Act.
In the soil.
I'm going to ask Mike a question. Mike.
Yeah.
It was raised by me because we were really going to have another panel sit for 2 days. And in regards to Kaitaia Hospital, and it may affect the other hospitals, Rongoa Maui, which is apparently they've got a department in the Kaitaia Hospital. Should that be within the definition or not? I mean, that was the thing. I mean,
I have a supplementary question to that because the other question I had was about that definition of commercial services as well. Because it was looking at there and looking at general practitioner service, so doctors, Rongo Māori, doctors, the submission presented today seeks to have those ancillary activities being allowed for the time. In Kaitaia as well, I know there's also the dentists, physios,
Yes.
When you get X-ray, and there's also a maternity ward. So, yeah, in practice there is quite a wide range of activities. Also, I'm familiar with Emergency Services the helicopter is used significantly because there's no makamokas and because there's no big winds. I mean, at least we have the helicopter, or else we just have a boat.
We don't have enough fuel for a boat.
Yeah, so genuinely, I think that emergency services, I take your argument there about the proximity to the hospital and that being considered as well in terms of the special zone. Because the reason that they're going to the hospital is to allow for those emergency services. And spatially, when you look at the actual towns, a lot of those activities spatially are within residential areas, and it would make sense for those reverse sensitivity considerations to be, within close proximity or therefore at the hospital. So I think they're quite interested in that. Yeah.
Have you got any comment on whether it should be in or not, or whether it's covered by the other definition?
Comfortably be in. I was just, again, my professional recommendation to you was to maintain consistency with Bargain Aid, so
Right, okay,
I'd see no problem with it being included.
okay, thank you. If there's nothing else, thank you very much for your presentation, thank you for waiting.
Thank you.
Drive safely back to Whangarei when you go. Now, Mr. Sanson, are you there? Steve, oh, yep. Good afternoon, thank you for waiting.
You're very welcome.
We're ready
Can you
when
hear me
you
all
are.
Yes. Yes.
Go when you're ready.
Okay. I'm just getting a bit of feedback, so I'm not sure what it is, but I'll carry on. Are you guys getting that?
Yep. No, we can hear fine. Just us turning pages.
We're just waiting for you to start, so when you're ready, we...
Okay, yep, okay. So it's Steve Sanson for Waitoto Developments. I'm here to talk about the Oronga Bay Special Zone. You guys have got my evidence, so I'll just take that as read and I'll just summarise the zone itself and what some of the activities are. I think mine will be pretty easy because I, in the whole, agree with the Section 42A report writer. So the zone is owned by one owner, Waitoto Developments. It's 4.7 hectares in size. It's located between Okiato and Russell Township proper. The current uses include a gas station, there's workshop and manager's offices, there's various marine-related light industrial uses. There's a men's shed and there's a landscape supply depot and various storage uses. There are indicative plans to close out the remaining development sites with building supply outlet stores that would service the Russell Peninsula. So Waitoto Developments is run by Mr. Rod Haynes, and he has various land holdings throughout the Whanau district. But just to add some context, I guess, to some of the submissions on the zone, is he also runs Haynes House Haulage Company, a relocatable company. And so you'll see some submissions there talking about second-hand buildings, relocated buildings, and that might be as a result of his his business activity. So my understanding of this special zone is that it was there to provide uses that couldn't be in the Russell Township proper. Obviously, Russell Township proper's got its own amenity and heritage character. And at the time of developing the zone, it wouldn't be appropriate for, these light industrial uses or even, certain commercial uses to be located directly within the township. And so the Oronga Bay Special Zone was that middle ground where there was sufficient land. It was located appropriate enough distance to both Russell, Okiato, and sort of various other areas in the Russell Peninsula to service those families, those businesses, people wanting to build houses out there. So that's the intent of the zone, and with only a few sites left, that will be its intent into the future. And just commenting on sort of the rules of the plan, the ODP versus the PDP, I think it's, they follow essentially the same format. Any activity requires the deposit of a concept development plan, the most recent of which was lodged in December 2003, which would be to close out, to provide for the retail and building supply outlet stores. like I said at the start, I agree with most of the recommendations of the Section 42 report writer on this chapter and zone, and happy to answer any questions.
The first question I've got, did you say there has been an approved concept plan or not?
So there's a concept plan in Appendix 6, which just lays as a very basic outline. But as more developments are proposed on the site, the concept development plans have to come through. That was lodged in December 2003. I'm unsure of its exact status.
So you don't know whether it's been approved by the council then? Because I think that's what any approved comprehensive development plan. So has the council, do you know the council?
It's the consents team, though. Yeah, it's just the consents team.
Has the council approved a comprehensive development plan on one of them? You know? Or what do you do answer it?
That question, unless it's been superseded, we have to check. But back in the day when I was a processing officer for council, I actually processed the consent for that stage, what was the equivalent of the comprehensive concept management plan that is a condition of the zone.
Well, it's OBZ-P1, it refers to the approved Ronald Bay outline concept plan and any approved comprehensive development
Yes, and
plan.
I do remember I processed one of those historically on behalf of council. There is obviously an ability to come in with subsequent ones, so we would have to go away and check if any other ones came in. But it's quite a high level document, and also because it is issued under the resource consent process, it also lapses after a certain period of time.
Yeah.
So we would have to do a little bit of homework to see what happened there, but I do know that there was a resource.
So the one you say that you sent in 2023, can you send a copy of that through to AK for us, Steve?
Yeah, I've got it on me now, so I'll send it to AK.
Okay.
Well, I would have been well timed.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Questions?
Just need understanding, probably from staff, but the relocatable buildings that are presently happening there are allowed to happen under current comprehensive plan.
We did some investigation for us on that.
Yes, yeah, my short answer is yes.
Yes, okay, cool. And so it would be status quo with the proposed district.
Yes.
Okay. And despite the fact that there has been a, from the Russell Protection Society, their submission's not, and although they're the only group that submitted on it, it is a contentious issue in Kororareka. They aren't enjoying seeing these relocatable buildings as you enter, you're just arriving into the beautiful Russell Peninsula and along that road, and these 4 years looking buildings are sitting there. Steve has the operator of the property read that submission, and is he going to do anything to mitigate the amenity?
Yes, so probably a question to ask back at the council, because they'll set the conditions on that. So the operator will only do what the conditions of consent say. So if there's nothing about visual amenity, or to say to repurpose, you know, if relocated buildings come on, there's a standard condition which normally says within 6 months you've got to reinstate the exteriors and confirm all bits and pieces. But if those aren't on the resource consent decisions, Commissioner, we can't do a hell of a lot about it.
So we could even stipulate that they have to be so far back from the road, so they're not, from time to time they're located right next to the road. They could be set back further as a condition. Okay.
I think what Stephen Sanson is referring to is the relocated building rules for new dwellings being established on sites. This is the activity that's being referred to in this zone is actually the storage of buildings temporarily as a storage activity, not as a relocated building. So the reference that Mr. Sanson's raised doesn't relate to this site, apart from if there is a building consent for a relocated building to be established permanently on the site. So that rule there doesn't relate to this zone, but this zone, the objectives and policies about screening from the road, etc., are something that the panel could consider.
Yeah.
Anything else? No, anything? Absolutely.
No, didn't have any other additional.
I think that's all, Mr. Sampson, unless you've got anything else you want to say to us? No, you happy? Thank you very much.
Yes.
Lunch, is it? And what time do you want to come back with your presentation?
How long have we got for lunch? We scheduled an hour, but it sounds good.
What time is it now?
1:30.
Yeah, 1:30.
You made wonderful time, Bill.
1:35. So an hour, we'll be back at 2:35. Is that okay, Bill? Back at 2:35.
2:35, are you happy with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, you